Hey, 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 hey. There we go.
Hello? Can I have everyone's attention, please? If you checked in yesterday, there's no need to check in today. However, if you were not here yesterday and you need to check in, please see Kara up at the back door, please. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So, day one has completed. I see some, we have distinguished guests. Thank you, Master Gunner Sergeant. It's an honor to have you with us. Good morning, Jose Figueroa here, contract support. We're starting day two of the DON-CIO, the U.S. Navy U.S. Marine Corps Spectrum Summit 2025. We're about to get things started with a panel. So we ended the day reminding you that we're gonna have a panel, have your questions ready so we can have an engaged discussion. So the day has come. But a couple of reminders as we like to continue to keep us on check with our left and right lateral limits. Classification level. Yesterday we were talking at our unclassified level. We did some adjustment, check with the leadership. I'm come to find out that we're gonna remain at an unclassified level. So please, all presentations, all discussions, unclassified level, both inside and outside of this room. Photos. So I want to say thank you because the word has got out to not take photos both online and in person here. Thank you. The one exception to that is we have added some QR codes to the side of the room to help you take a photo and be able to submit your after action, which then leads me to my next comment. Thank you, because we have started to receive after action reports. So it looks like the QR code is working. It looks like those of you are starting to use it, which is a good news. So keep them coming. Next thing, the distribution of slides. I know that usually one of the big questions. We also got it online, so I would like to address it again. We are going to release every slide that has been cleared for distribution upon completion of the summit. So if you're itching that that's the big question you got, don't worry, I just took that away from you. We are going to contact everyone and make sure that every slide that we can release, we get it out to the group. What else? And today we're starting off with the panel to where Ms. Evara Pierce is going to be moderating. So those of you that are in the panel, if you can start making your way up here so we can go ahead and begin on time. And before I do so, I wanted to, the last reminder is, if you're new to the conference today, please talk to our colleagues, Ms. Kara and Randall, to make sure that we write down your name as we're trying to at least keep track of everyone that has been attended here. So those of you that have not done so, no rush, don't need to get off your seat right now, but in between your breaks, please come on over. Okay. They're not listening to the audience teams. Can we make sure that we turn on? Hey, it's good to have some troubleshooting in the morning. Okay. Our audiovisual team is back there trying to click the right buttons. Virtual team, can I get a mic check over? That's a very deliberate time of the troubleshooting. So work is being underway. So the Wi-Fi for the summit is West 2025, WEST, the number's 2025. I've had success doing it all caps. I've heard of folks doing it lower caps, so. Or does it say that we're still down on the microphones? Okay. So as an after action, somebody remind me to have a list of jokes so that while there's troubleshooting, we can keep people entertained. So if anybody have a joke or a skit, the floor is yours. All right, team, can I get a microphone check on virtual LAN? Okay, okay, team. Test 1, 2. It's off. Test 1, 2. 3, 2, 1. Can somebody on the virtual LAN make sure that you guys can hear us? Okay. We're getting thumbs up. So let's go ahead and get things started as we were hoping to do 10 minutes ago. So if I can ask the panel, Mr. Mark Johnson, Art De Leon, Ms. Avar Pierce, and our DOD visitors, can you just please take the panel? And Avar, we're gonna get you a mic, if you're gonna, okay.
No, I'm standing. But thank you. All right, we ready to rock and roll? Okay. Watch out, I done had like 3 cups of coffee this morning. I'm gonna come down hard eventually. Okay, so I'm your MC for today for the NSS, the National Spectrum Strategy panel. So I'm gonna allow everyone from my left to introduce themselves real quickly and tell them where you work, and then we'll start the questions.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Art De Leon. I'm the director for the Department of Navy Strategic Spectrum Policy. Have a great team here. To the left here is a Department of Navy CIO team. A lot of great folks, and we can't do it without them, so I appreciate them being here supporting this whole effort. Thank you.
Good morning, Mark Johnson, OpNav N2N6N. I'm the CNO lead for electromagnetic environmental effects and spectrum matters. Have Mr. David Willis, my deputy, here up front, and lots of our support teams from NAVC and the NSWC Dahlgren. Glad to be here today, thanks.
Good morning, Josh Weaver, Director of Spectrum Initiatives and Analysis at Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Do a lot of R&D for all things spectrum to mitigate risks from the auctions, as well as EW, cyber. We've got the AOR for the base OTA contract with the National Spectrum Consortium. The executive team is present in the room here if you have questions. We also have I'm a prior Navy civilian. We've got some Navy civilians in here that are executing some of our modernization programs across the training ranges in CONUS. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Joe Molnar, Naval Research Laboratory. I'm a branch head, the branch head for networks and communications. And basically, as an engineer, I've been working in dynamic spectrum access and that area for generally 25 years, and have spectrum access research and development projects, and I'm continuing to work in that area focused on spectrum, but also as it relates to systems, applications, networks, and communications.
Okay, awesome. So you can now take note that we have some diverse talent on the stage. So once I ask the questions, we can double back at the end if you want to drill down a little more from the panelists. So let's start. Okay, how do we get to a ubiquitous dynamic spectrum sharing environment? Again, starting from my left, Art.
So Alvaro, that's a very tough question, and the reality, how do we get to a ubiquitous environment? Holistically, we really have to look at the problem as a whole. This is just not a federal problem. It is a holistic United States problem. So industry, federal agencies, federal partners will have to participate in coming up with that solution, and that includes academia. I think we have that echo back, and the DIB. So that foundation of how do we work together, I think we're going to have some hard discussions on disruptive technology, because that's what it's going to feel like for all of us. That foundation means that how do we redesign our architectures, not only from a terrestrial, aeronautical, and space type organization, and make the most effective usage of all our spectrum. And until we start having those hard discussions, we're not going to get there. That foundation is going to require us to do something very similar to what we did for the space run, trying to get to the moon. And because that is a topic that we're describing today, how do we get back to the moon? And how do we create communication nodes to support those future requirements? We do have to have an Apollo mission of spectrum. All the agencies, industry partners get into the same room and having that hard discussion. And I think that's going to be how we redesign our architectures to should support that future environment. And the bottom line, what does that do? We realize that if we want to be the economy of choice for the United States, we're going to have those hard discussions. And by doing that, it is a breeding ground for us to have the greatest defense as well, because they support each other. Oh.
You know, the discussion at OpNav right now at the 3-star level is we acknowledge, and the Deputy 3-star Mizedjan states continuously, at least for right now, dynamic spectrum sharing in particular, DSS, is a concept and a goal, but it doesn't exist as a current functional system. I do not disagree at all with anything that Art said, but we got a major initial hurdle to get over, and that is to demonstrate DSS, and that really requires that we have a firm, a rigorous process to assess the effectiveness of DSS, and that's going to be particularly challenging, especially for radars, especially for Navy current radars. So I think we've set up a great start with DSS, with R&E, Josh Weaver leading the team at R&E to lead the overall DoD effort. And thank heaven we got some of Joe's counterparts, in particular, Dr. Linda Thomas at NRL, with just outstanding substantive experience of how to design spectrum access systems and so on. So I think I am focused, as my leadership is right now, on that initial hurdle of let's get DSS demonstrated and rigorously evaluated so that we know we're not degrading current capability.
So from an R&D perspective, we need to create opportunities to experiment and demonstrate DSA in a way that also builds a level of trust amongst the operational users that are going to be operating under this new spectrum paradigm. And you heard from Joe earlier, right? We've been doing DSA for the better part of 25 years now, maybe even longer, but we haven't been able to deploy it in a meaningful way because we don't have the infrastructure and tools to support it, and we need to build that user trust, as I said earlier, so that we can, Evel Knievel, that valley of death that R&D is normally in, and actually transition into this new era of dynamic spectrum sharing.
So I'll take a slightly different tact. I think that part of the problem that we have is DSS, as we're trying to define it, is meant to interoperate with existing legacy systems. If you look at something like the ISM band, and you have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and a number of other things. And if you're, in a dense city environment, you probably see 15, 20, 50 Wi-Fi access points. And they're all interoperating. They're all providing the service they need. But it was specifically designed to access that way. So CDMA, CSMA, were designed for that application. And, so we're coming into a situation in which we have legacy systems that we're trying to just shoehorn in and bolt on a spectrum solution. And, I work in the systems directorate, so we have communications, radar, EW, and, as part of the cross-functional team that we're supporting OpNav with, we've pulled all those resources together. And it's difficult to have them understand how their system is supposed to interoperate when it was never designed to operate that way. So it requires a whole new methodology of thinking, and you have to go forward with creative ideas that try to address that.
Okay, I thank you for that. So, I'm going to quote a term that was coined by Art de Leon. When you try to make something work for everybody, as long as we're equally unhappy, that's how we're probably going to have to share. So anyway, next question. So now we're going to jump into like the workforce, right? So as you see in the room, some of us are well seasoned, and some of the seasoning is starting to move on to other things that they want to do. So we're going to talk about workforce and how can we grow that. So from your agency and your perspective, we're going to start at the end and move to my right. What is your perspective on the state of affairs in the term of size and growing the spectrum workforce community from where you sit in your agency?
So, me. I guess we have no spectrum workforce personnel. We have RF engineers, microwave engineers. We have people that are involved in our organization in designing systems, understanding how they interoperate in the system, in the environment. And also we have the difficulty, we're a working capital fund organization. So if we don't have projects that are funding that effort, we don't have any specific focus. We do the work that we're paid to do. And it would be great to have spectrum workforce development funds that are just there to initiate people into the environment of spectrum and the problems associated with spectrum. We don't have that yet, and if we do in the future, that's probably a great opportunity. Over.
So from R&E, we've got a couple initiatives looking at this problem because, a quote that Dr. Rondeau likes to toss out from time to time is that we only have about 4,000 RF engineers left in the country, so we need to encourage people to get into those STEM fields, to go to consider taking the EE track and then focus on the hard part, which is EMS, and then, get into the workforce, whether that's, the DIB or if they choose to work for Uncle Sam. So, very interested in bolstering that. Some actions that R&E is doing. Mr. C.J. Masiag, who's our director for cyber, runs a congressionally funded Viceroy program that partners with a whole lot of academic institutions across the nation. They're focused on cyber and EMS, but really trying to build up that center of excellence in a kind of consortia type matter of universities. And then I know Dr. Rondeau has previously talked interest in plugging in more with our National Guard bureaus to be able to have that EMS, real-time, operationally relevant kind of training and education to build it up, that expertise within the department. Thanks.
So I think this question really does have a segue from our first question about getting to a ubiquitous dynamic spectrum sharing environment. That implies we have people who are knowledgeable and experienced. And quite frankly, so this is my personal professional opinion, we need to have a cultural shift in mindset. Let me give you an example. I think we heard, if you were present and lucky enough to hear Vice Admiral Thomas yesterday, he referred to a handful of spectrum gurus when he was in 7th Fleet. And I think we're acknowledging that we really still have a handful of spectrum gurus in a relative sense. So, but the question is, what is my agency doing to develop spectrum workforce? So, as I mentioned yesterday, and for those of you who are not available to hear the pitch yesterday, I did touch upon, and we're going to talk about it more on Thursday, the electromagnetic environmental effects, the E-cubed and Spectrum Navy Training Systems Plan. Now that's a document, an NTSP, and I'm not an expert in NTSPs other than I know I have one. An NTSP is usually put together for a system that you field in the Navy, and you come up with how you train sailors to operate and use the system properly. Well, E-cube and Spectrum is not a box. It's a discipline, and we've got it's a special. It's considered to deviate from the standard NTSP format, but that was established, just last signed in 2012. The initiative right now is to update the NTSP to make it more representative of what we do in the Navy for electromagnetic spectrum operations. So just as we were discussing earlier, I think Joe mentioned, they're bringing an NRL together, their radar, EW, and other spectrum-dependent experts. Well, the same is going to hold true for EMSO, right? Anything that relies on spectrum, we got to have the training built in. And so the effort my agency is doing right now, we're attempting to do, is to update, modernize the E-cubed and Spectrum NTSP so that we have the training in place for that mindset of electromagnetic spectrum operations, radio frequency use across the bands, and ensuring compatibility across the warfighting domains.
So ladies and gentlemen, we're in a whole new era of strategic competition, and in the reality, when you look at the spectrum community is holistically tied to strategic, operational, tactical components, and I like to thread it that way, start off at the strategic level. When we talk World Radio Conference, it's competitive, and we know that there's 149 different countries that are operating within that World Radio Conference. In comparison, we'll send 100 to their 400 people. That foundation starts to paint a picture, and we get into essentially the DC Beltway area, where our focus area is policy, and lately Spectrum Relocation Fund. And that key aspect of how do we maintain the level of operations that are being levied on us when our office was never focused to support those type of requirements. Spectrum Relocation Fund, typically if we looked at AWS-1 in 2001, our organization was never set up to essentially focus on Spectrum Relocation Fund as a whole. Now we have 3 auctions that we're essentially running out of the headquarters agencies, with 2 more potentially on the rise here. Let's talk specifically. There's not enough spectrum planners to support the surge of requirements that are coming out of the first 3 auctions and the additional 2. Where is that workforce going to come from? That foundation is just an impact of how that is being affected by all organizations, and how do we plan and support those level of requirements. Then we go into the operational components, because our service members are part of this solution and problem that we're trying to describe from a manpower standpoint. And when we look at operationally, you have one spectrum planner that is planning essentially, and we'll say too, the entire Pacific in support of those type of capabilities. And then at the tactical level, you have that same 4 people that are deploying on a regular basis, because the size of our force as it relates to spectrum planning is very small. So we put a lot of wear and tear on those spectrum planners that are doing that work on a day-to-day basis. Now, how do we thread all the key components of what I like to describe as the users and abusers of spectrum? Because there's key pieces that we should be integrating as part of this discussion. Offensive and defensive type communication capabilities are critical to those operations. So there should be a focus area of how we integrate electronic warfare, signal intelligence, and the EMS, because that focus area has never been designed under that premise. And in order for us to do what we're doing in the future and what's being shown every day in Ukraine, we have to rethink on how we look at spectrum holistically. Key pieces that have been designed and talked about within NDA language, that we establish spectrum as a priority, but we don't show it in any of our funding documents. And that's also tied to our personnel. Our personnel are undermanned and trying to do more for less, but there's only so much you can ask your folks to do. And it doesn't show the attrition that they're going through, because when you work at one individual 18 hours a day and you expect them to produce every day, eventually it's going to affect their ability to deliver information. The information that is no longer valid. It turns into something that's being essentially nicked away, because you can't continue to operate a force like that, thinking that that one person is always going to be the driver. So we certainly have a manpower problem until we really take that on and look at it. Strategic, operational, tactical, that's one driver that no one really looks at, that we hit on a day-to-day basis, and this is including legislative actions that we'll spend the next 6 months burning the midnight oil with 1 or 2 people. So it is a hard topic that we need to resolve.
Awesome. So I know I'm not on the panel answering this question, but I'm going to give you my perspective. From my perspective, we need to consider engineers, but we also need to consider the ones wearing a uniform, operational. So when you have the operational perspective tied with the engineering, then you're going to produce a better product. So panel, I would like for you to consider that in hiring force. As you see the vacancies come up, bring that knowledge from the operational where you sat back to this side of the workforce, and I think we can make Spectrum a better place to be, moving forward. Okay, so all sides. We need you in the audience. We need you on the panel. We need you out of those uniforms. But also, while you're wearing those uniforms, filter up what you think. What kind of tools would you like to see enhanced, if they're existing tools, or build a better tool? All right. Okay. Let's keep it moving, because Spectrum is my heart. All righty. I bleed it. So next question, how can the NSS and R&D plan be implemented effectively? Starting from Art.
It's a great question, Elvira. I'll start off with a lot of key capabilities and a lot of discussions happening around the National Spectrum Strategy, and I'd like to focus on dynamic spectrum sharing and its key capabilities. We have to start somewhere, and I realize that there's a definition out there. And the key aspect of how do I look at definitions, sometimes we can go down the road and really over-define that definition of what dynamic spectrum sharing is. The problem with that is, because we're human, we'll try to define it so well that we can't build to it. So that foundation is, let's leverage the current definition, allow flexibility so we can build many small capabilities so we lose small and not big. And I look back at the history of what we did with JTRS. We spent a lot of money trying to develop something that the technology couldn't support at the time. Great concept, great capabilities, but the one thing that we didn't design into the overall architecture was the antenna. How do we build that self-healing capability when we couldn't design the antenna to support that requirement? Technology is here today. I think we have the ability to do that, but we have to take incremental steps while we start to look at the bigger picture of our problem. But the key piece is, what are we missing in the overall architecture? How do I inform program managers the direction that we're going? That guidance is key. What does that roadmap look like? What are the key scenarios? Because I realize when we talk legacy to future type capability, money becomes an object, and if we try to do it all at once, we'll break the force. So there has to be a realistic approach in how we get there, and it has to be incremental, and we can't do it all at once. So if we're going to look at a small component of terrestrial, small component of aeronautical, and a small component of space type systems, we need to focus there, learn some lessons, and then move forward on smartly, because we already made a lot of mistakes, and now we know how to start integrating that into the future force.
So I'm going to underscore a couple of points I think I've already made, but I think in particular among the comments Art just offered in terms of incremental developments, I think that is part of it. Again, the point here, at least from the OpNav perspective, is we want rigorous application of development and assessment of how well R&D innovations are working in terms of not ensuring that there's no degradation of capability. I think that it was important, especially if we use the example of the dynamic spectrum sharing efforts and the research going on, that we have a well-defined lead, R&E in this case, very, very appropriate, with some good partnership with established and demonstrated technical leadership skills, such as at NRL. So effective implementation of the R&D plan, I think, is going to rely upon a disciplined process. It's never as fast as you want it to be. I think we can do some things at speed with the expectation that make some mistakes early, identify the problem, and work to correct. And it will be, as Art already mentioned, iterative, but good engineering discipline applied, especially when it comes to assessing to verify that there's no reduction in our defensive capabilities.
Thanks. And you hit a key point there that Dr. Porter used to say, when you're doing R&D, fail early, fail often, but let's be real, don't fail too often, because you learn a lot in failure, right? But you have to actually get there to do that. And so I'll speak more on the National Spectrum R&D Plan, because that's my area of focus here. I'd say the first step to employing that is to read it, right? Get the word out there that we actually have a Spectrum R&D plan as a nation now, which is great. And then, what the strategy or what the plan doesn't really discuss, and that was intentional, is resourcing to do that R&D. R&D takes resources to do it, whether you're in the government or in the industrial or academic sectors. So what we need to do then is smartly, as research dollars are made available, regardless of where you sit in the ecosystem, is to keep that plan in mind, because that's kind of where the roadmap, where the smart spectrum savvy people, the interagency, advise the White House that we need to be thinking and heading in. So just challenge everyone to do that. And then going back to some points that Ms. Pierce made, the key to transitioning that R&D into a usable capability for our warfighter is to have the warfighter in the discussions during the design and testing of that capability. We want to say, we want that feedback, like, hey, it'd be really great for my job if this tool that you're building did this, that, and that. And then we were able to implement that early on before the program is almost over. Get it in there early, get those requirements kind of fleshed out, even if they're loose, but start building something that the pointy end of the stick actually wants to use. And if you do that, then when you have completed that R&D program, you're going to have that pull from the user community to actually transition that technology into action.
I'd say that the United States has some of the best engineers in the world. And I think that we can apply that engineering talent through the U.S. government research labs, through the FFRDCs, through the UARTs, through all of our industry to address the problem. The focus needs to be on buy-in from all levels. So the message has to get out across all of the government, all of the industry, all of the academia, so that we can focus that talent and deliver the solutions that we need. I think oftentimes we're so fragmented in the amount of things that we need to focus on that we can't really focus on our most strategic assets and our most strategic problems that we need to address. And this is one of them, and I think we just need to spend the focus to do it. Over.
So Elvira, before we go back to you, I just have a question for the audience, mostly for the folks in uniform, the ones that are not tied to the Beltway and hear the information on a regular basis. How many of you know what we're talking about? Is there one, you're tied to what we do, so I know you know what we're talking about. How many Marines, sailors in this room understand the approach of dynamic spectrum sharing, the capability that we're trying to deliver, and what is the key focus? That's the problem. And our solutions likely will come from smart young kids like yourself, just because you grew up with a cell phone in your hand, building applications. I can't even fathom building an application because that's not what I was exposed to as a young man. Those capabilities exist, and that ingenuity is within that age group, and you can really change the world for us, but we need you involved.
Absolutely. So thank you for saying that, Art. Okay, it's question time already? I want to get through the panel real quick, and then please come back with your question if you don't mind. I want to say this, that you have a lot of talent in the room. Stop us on breaks and ask those questions. We're here to help educate. You have, Rich said the other day, well, yesterday, that they have taken that show on the road, right? So he can try to educate what does all of this spectrum sharing, dynamic spectrum sharing, what does, repurposing, what does that mean? Because if we have you sitting there and you don't understand it and you don't take advantage of the people here, we're going to lose you. And we need you all included in these decisions moving forward, okay? So thank you. Let's see. How does DSS improve coexistence or sharing, and when can it be integrated? Starting at the end.
Okay, I'd say that I think Mark may have mentioned before that we don't really know what DSS is. I think we have a definition. I think we have ideas, and a lot of the work that's going to go on in the near future is going to be focused on what DSS is and how it enables coexistence. At this point, I think until we, there's a difference between understanding an idea and then proving the idea and then implementing the idea. So I think we're having a general discussion that people kind of know what DSS is. We haven't proven anything and we have some ideas that show some promise, that are feasible potentially for applications. But until we actually prove them, it's difficult to say we have a solution for coexistence. And then the hard part is then implementing it, because that takes time. But we have a good start, and we have all the talent and all of you that now are aware. So
I'm going to read the definition of DSS as defined in the R&D plan. Although it's the first time it was published, we can't take full credit for it. This is a definition that was agreed to at very senior levels of the federal government. But it says dynamic spectrum sharing means adaptive coexistence using technologies that enable multiple electromagnetic spectrum users to operate on the same frequencies in the same geographic area without causing harmful interference to other users. So it's unfortunate that that definition also creates ill-defined or includes ill-defined phrases like harmful interference. That means different things to a lot of different people. But we do have that's the definition that was in the plan, and that's what we're moving towards. And I don't think we can afford not to. We have operations within the DoD, but other federal agencies also have spectrum-dependent operations and needs, and we need to find a way to support the way that they're doing things now, but there's also enhancements to those missions that may require different ways of accessing the spectrum or different bands of spectrum. So we want to be cognizant of that. And then equally, there's a huge economic push for additional accesses in spectrum. And there's too big of an opportunity there from an economic perspective to not at least look at it and see if there's ways that we can figure out how to do this. But I'm partial to the DoD, obviously. We'd like to maintain our mission, but I'm sensitive to the fact that the opportunities for economic exploration in spectrum, as well as being able to maintain our technical edge and advantage globally, is compelling enough that we should be pursuing DSS with the technical rigor that Mr. Johnson here speaks of.
I'm glad you read the definition. We probably should have done that at the kickoff here. And I understand your point about we need maybe a firmer grasp on what we mean when we say harmful interference. So I'm going to give you one of the aspects, one element or aspect of harmful interference from my perspective, and it's especially for those of you who are in uniform and at the pointy end of the spear. One of the harmful interferences I'm worried about is desensitization of sensors and weapon systems. How do you know you have interference if it don't appear on a screen? I'll tell you one way you know. You have 10 seconds less to respond to an incoming. So when we talk about harmful interference, I'm with you. We need to firm up the definition and understand what our terms are. But when I'm thinking about harmful interference, that's one of the key things I'm thinking about. And in particular, what does interference look like, and what if it doesn't look like anything except less time to respond to an incoming threat? Here's a way. I'm going to give you two examples. So I'm done with my tirade. Here's two examples of how spectrum sharing can benefit. We want to train like we fight. We would rather not have to push off of shore greater distances in order to do it, to preclude interference. In other words, you would rather stay in the areas that we currently have, especially for our waterfront training. You'd rather stay in those defined areas for training instead of having to go an additional 100 nautical miles or whatever it is, because you want to reduce the likelihood of interfering with commercial. So if we have dynamic spectrum sharing, the hope is that we would be able to retain our training areas without having to push out further. Okay, that's example number one. So if we think about what we've talked about earlier, that is to say, I think Vice Admiral Thomas touched upon scaling of robotic and autonomous systems to integrate more platforms at speed. Well, DSS, dynamic spectrum sharing in general, could facilitate scaling of autonomous systems with the ability to maneuver in spectrum with other fleet and joint coalition spectrum-dependent capabilities users. So there's another example. Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, because we're a little over. I want Art to finish, and I want to apologize to the gentleman up front that had a question that they needed to ask. Ask one of these gentlemen on the stage during a break.
So,
Not
so,
yours.
so key piece, as Mark just described, spectrum is a critical enabler to essentially the naval force. The key piece is we don't want to put sailors and Marines and national security at risk as we get there. So let's be mindful of the capabilities that provides to the force. And second, let's think about our policies that were designed essentially in the 1960s, 50s when tube technology exists. They were designed to be very conservative. And I realize that for what we're describing, a lot of policy is going to have to change. And we're likely going to have to go beyond those policies in order to achieve the goals that we're describing here. So we're going to have to start working hard holistically because we're going to have to design that legacy to future capability interface.
Okay, great. So thank you, panelists, for all these awesome responses. Thank you for listening. Again, if you can think of things that we can do better, because we're in the early stages of understanding what DSS is. So with that said, I'm going to close out so that we can bring the next person to the stage. Thank you.
Hey team, good morning. Jose here. So I want to thank everyone for the flexibility. We're doing a little bit of shuffling of time because of today's little delay, but Mr. Andrew is ready to go ahead and kick things off. We're going to have Mr. Andrew Portune, Dynamic Spectrum Management. So Guru Oscar is going to be explained to us. So request your undivided attention. So Andrew.
Will do so much. Do I control the slides from here? Or do
You can just slide whichever one works better.
Awesome. All right, thanks so much, everyone. Oh, that's kind of loud. I'll try to go a little bit faster today to make up a bit of time. If there's any questions, come find me at the end, find me at the break. Peraton has a booth downstairs. More than happy to talk your ear off about Oscar for as long as possible. So just get me started. In any case, Oscar is a program that was funded under the SARDP Tranche 2 set of efforts. Funded out of the Spectrum Relocation Fund, so some of the Spectrum tools which Mr. Weaver was talking about on the panel, this is one of them. It stands for Operational Spectrum Comprehension, Analytics, and Response. The Oscar program itself is coming to a close in a couple of days, I think the end of this week, if I recall correctly, but there's a follow-on program to this called Spectrum Integration System, which is being managed by NSWC Corona. I'm going to put Mr. Ben Fellows on the spot over there if you want to raise your hand, Ben. We are looking for the largest group possible to participate in the development of SIS, as Mr. Weaver mentioned, having that feedback often and early in the process to make sure that what we're developing is really answering the mail and developing and delivering really useful Spectrum tools to the community. So please get in touch with me, Mr. Fellows, or really anyone else that's involved with the effort, and we'd love to put you on the mailing list as we start setting up a working group. So what I'll be talking about today, again, dynamic spectrum management. So really what we're looking at is a common problem that I think everyone in this room is quite intimately familiar with. There's diminishing spectrum resources, increasing spectrum needs. So how do we manage that as a community, especially as there's also increasing complexity in how we're using the spectrum in the concept of static allocations that could just be made and then forgotten about is certainly something which is starting to go away. The need to be more dynamic, both in benign environments where there's federal to federal or federal to commercial sharing requirements or actors, but also in contested environments as we start to take these kinds of tools out beyond the continental United States. We just need to have a greater understanding of what's going on in the environment, greater efficiency in how we plan to use the spectrum, greater adaptability in terms of how we can adjust to unexpected things which we identify or experience out in the field, and also the ability to look back at the wealth of data which comes in. In some respects, spectrum, especially as you start making a lot of spectrum measurements, becomes a big data problem, and that requires the right kind of tools to be able to access and answer the kinds of questions which commonly come up. So what we developed under OSCAR is a spectrum tool which is seeking to address some of the challenges for dynamic spectrum management. Essentially, OSCAR stands for Operational Spectrum Comprehension, Analytics, and Response. So because of that, OSCAR has three fundamental areas which we tend to work in. The first is the planning phase, where we have tools that are set to expedite the allocation and assignment of frequencies from an authorized spectrum manager to multiple concurrent users, bringing in context for what else might be going on in the area, both on the commercial side as well as on the federal side. So that a spectrum manager can more quickly and expeditiously make those allocations in a way that provides confidence that there's not going to be interference. You know, where can we do sharing because of spatial separation? Where can we do sharing because of time separation? Having a good tool helps with that. The other thing that we're trying to do with OSCAR on the planning side is the ability to project what RF signatures look like, which is something that has multiple different use cases. As well as have a common user interface that could be accessed from just any old modern web browser, so that multiple users can kind of log in, see where they are in the process, see what's going on, see where there might be issues or concerns. So planning stage really sets you up for what we call the execution stage, which is where OSCAR starts to tie in real-time spectrum measurements from distributed passive RF sensors. So the concept there is you instrument the area of regard, whether that's a range or whether that's someplace else in the environment, with one or more sensors. You know, the more sensor coverage you have, the more sensor density you can afford, of course, the more information that you get. OSCAR centralizes the command and control of those sensors such that you can automate the acquisition of real-time spectrum information, and then run a set of automated analytics on those. So comparing what's going on in the spectrum to what you thought was supposed to be going on in the spectrum, being able to identify unauthorized spectrum usage, being able to identify emissions control or MCON violations for more tactical use cases, being able to identify where the spectrum is actually being used and where it's not. One of the goals from tools like OSCAR is to provide actual measurements and metrics for spectrum utilization, so that the next time that Congress wants to auction off a part of the spectrum and they ask, well, you know, are you guys actually using this piece of the spectrum? It's not just planning data which is answering that question, but actual measurement data that says, yeah, you know, we have this allocation over here and we use it 99% of the time. You take that away from us, or you require that we are a secondary user in that band, and that's going to be pretty difficult for us to do. Or, you know, it also helps spectrum managers identify people that are really asking for far more spectrum than they need. I've been part of test events where you've got certain users that request 50 allocations and then use one of them. And then those other 49 allocations which they asked for made it much more difficult for every other participant in that exercise to get the spectrum that they needed. So, you know, everyone makes mistakes sometimes, but you could start looking at patterns of life because all the data is being archived. So, a number of tools on the real-time side. We'll get a little bit more into that. And then all the data that comes into OSCAR is archived, the spectrum data, the metric data, the planning data. So there's the ability to produce autonomous reports to support AARs, as well as to really dive into that data, again, from an algorithmic perspective or from a manual perspective to understand those patterns of life, what signals are most present. You go after the fact and say, hey, this is a signal of interest that I care about. How often have I seen that in the last day, the last month, the last week, in this area, from this sensor? Maybe it's a mobile sensor that was in different locations. Got all the data. It's just about that accessibility question, being able to pull that up and make sense of it. We're trying to make OSCAR as intuitive as possible so that you don't need to have a Ph.D. or some graduate degree in order to be able to use it. Generally, when we train people on the tool, it takes, you know, a day or so to get some familiarity with how to actually work the interface. And after that, we've tried to make the actual processes as intuitive as possible after that. I think I'll take questions at the end, just a matter of time. Something quick?
Okay, and so we don't have to input it manually?
Yeah,
Does it pull it from all the?
Great question. So yeah, we're pulling in CFAFs that come from Spectrum 21 as the authoritative source. Right now, we don't have a direct machine-to-machine connection because Oscar is on the low side and Spectrum 21 lives on the high side. But that's part of the maturation efforts which are currently underway. So you can export a bundle of CFAFs from Spectrum 21, and then there's a single input button that brings all that data into Oscar.
What about civilian, like licensing and things like that?
That's something which is currently in process, but FCC records, other things like that. We want to have the same kind of easy process to bring that information in. Yes.
Okay. Just a tip: if you give us a tool that we have to do more just to use, especially from a operator standpoint, for all my guys that are out in the field,
you're not going to use
that's one less thing we'll use. We'll be like,
exactly.
yeah, you just made my life way harder.
Absolutely. I mean, that's been one of our guiding principles from the beginning, and one of the reasons why under Oscar we had a working group, mostly with range spectrum managers, because that was the focus of the Oscar development, to say, hey guys, is this something that you'd actually find useful? Where can we streamline this process a bit more? So bringing in data is clearly one point in that, but also if there's too many manual processes to task sensors, to bring in data, to run geolocation, so on and so forth, then it becomes a burden and not an asset. So. Well understood. I don't want to say that we are 100% there because we are most definitely not. But this is where we're looking for additional participants to provide good inputs to us. So moving forwards, on the architecture side, I'm not going to go through this full diagram. Mostly this is to make the point that Oscar was developed using a microservices-based architecture. This architecture is actually being a bit more modernized for distributed compute currently under the follow-on program. But the way that it was set up like this allows for very easy extensibility. It's not like it's all very tight-knit together. You can create new services for tailor-made to specific use cases or specific end needs, and easily get that into the overall Oscar workflow. On the front end, as mentioned, we have a web-based user interface that you can use to connect to Oscar. We've had people bring it up on a phone before using Safari. We've had people on Chrome, Firefox, whatever, be able to get in and log in and see what's going on. Some of the test events we've been at have had multiple concurrent users that all just want to see what's going on for the centers that they care about, for the mission plans that they care about, and we do try to support that. This also, I think, shows a little bit of how we're bringing in data from external databases, Spectrum 21, JSDR, other specialty planners like Speed or Uno Planner that produce comms plans. Essentially, we could bring that information in as well. And then critically, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is that spectrum situational awareness piece and being able to bring in data from multiple different types of sensors. The key thing for the Oscar architecture is flexibility in deployment. We have a set of services which currently all need to live on the same, what we call server computer. It doesn't have to be a server rack. It could be a cloud instance. It could be a laptop that you have out in the field. Main thing is that computer where your backend services are running need to be accessible by wherever your front-end client is and need to be accessible to whatever sensors you've got connected to the system. So networking is one thing which we commonly face during deployments. On the sensor network and signal processing side, one again of the key guiding principles for Oscar was flexibility. So we put a lot of effort into building what we call a third-party sensor controller, so that you as government end users are not vendor locked into one particular kind of sensor. There are new sensors that come out every day, well maybe not every day, but every year. Latest and greatest stuff might come from a new vendor. If you are vendor locked into one particular vendor solution, then you're missing out on the sensor that might meet your requirements. The last thing that we want is for somebody on the government side to have to replace all the software that they've done all their training on, all their data archiving on, because a new sensor came out and they need that new sensor for their use cases. We're currently integrated with what we think of as the best state-of-the-art sensors that are out there. The Khaki Spectrum Guard Pro, the CRFS RFI sensors, we've worked with those. The Rhodium Schwartz handheld spectrum analyzers, Keysight spectrum analyzers. Sensors that already exist, that the government's already invested in, that operational units are already using in the field, are ones that we can already integrate with. Probably would get in trouble if I didn't mention that Peraton also has a sensor, low cost, lower capability sensor called SecureSense. That has met a number of needs as well. So the interesting thing about Oscar is that, again, you can choose the sensors that best meet your requirements, deploy those. They could be mobile, they could be at fixed locations, they could be a mix of the above. You can choose multiple different kinds of sensors and bring them all in one network for one single common operating picture. So oftentimes when we're talking to people about what their needs are, they might need some very high capability sensors to detect very spurious emissions which are out there in the environment. That's great, but you might not need all of your sensors to be the most expensive sensor. You might be able to get away with one or two high capability, high cost sensors and a lot of lower cost, low capability mobile sensors for forward deployed sensing. Again, so long as all the sensors are on a network that can see the Oscar server, it's fine for us to work with. Backhaul is a big issue that we address with Oscar as well, because anytime that you need to move a lot of data around, that becomes a limiting factor. We do as much as possible for edge processing so that you don't need to backhaul data. That's one way to do it. But yeah, we're not looking at streaming IQ data or anything like that. We keep all the IQ, for the most part, out at the edge, and then just bring back signal detections, just bring back frequency domain data, something that gives you a picture for what's going on without requiring a completely new kind of backhaul network to be put in place. For a number of our tactical use cases, we're actually riding on the same backhaul that Army or Navy or somebody else might be using for their regular communications, using tactical mesh radios. We've also used private 5G or LTE networks. We've used point-to-point microwave links or a mix of all of the above in order to backhaul the data. So really, again, flexibility being the main thing. And then as far as the analytics go, we have analytics that run at the edge where possible. We also have analytics that run on the server side for Oscar, where we do things like energy detection, signal characterization, the spectrum auditing, where we're comparing what's going on in the spectrum to what's expected to go on in the spectrum, audits, alerts, so on and so forth. And then we also are starting to get into more of the AI, ML side of things when it comes to adaptive spectrum monitoring. So that you don't have to come up with one single static plan. You can say, here are the signals that I care about, here's the planning information that I care about, and then let a more automated agent do the scan by scan control for how your sensors are actually deployed based upon what they're seeing. So definitely more I could talk about there in a different setting. So another thing that we've done on Oscar, this is more getting to the R side or the response side of Oscar, is dynamic configuration of spectrum-dependent systems. So we look at this as kind of being like a centralized version of dynamic spectrum access. DSA radios that are coming out are intended to be self-managing, but for a lot of more legacy systems, that's challenging to do. So the workflow here is that you get your sensor networks to understand what's going on in the environment, identify where there might be interference or anomalies or something which might increase risk or otherwise just might not make the spectrum manager feel comfortable with the current allocations and how spectrum-dependent systems are being used. And then based upon that, Oscar can come up with a recommendation for, hey, I think that you should move your comms network from this frequency to that frequency, which we've scanned in the environment and we've back-referenced against the planning data and know to be a clear channel. With the spectrum manager in the loop to give the green light, then we can push that new plan out directly to the spectrum-dependent systems, the radios, and get them to execute that in what I would call near real time. We've done this with Army at an exercise called CyberQuest using trellisware radios, which had an API that we could directly access. So with a spectrum manager in the loop, again, 10, 15 seconds between an interference event, a planned interference events popping up, and the spectrum manager reviewing the data, saying, yes, I want to move you to a new channel. If you want to do it fully automated, we have a capability for that as well, but our expectation in talking to the community is that it's going to be a little while before people feel comfortable with a fully automated system that's moving your radios from frequency to frequency to frequency, since there is some risk involved with doing that. So again, it allows for concepts of more centralized DSA to come into play now, because you could also have these actions just get pushed out to individual people who then go to the field and retune the radios. That's another approach to acting upon the information which is coming out of this. Okay, so on the theater level side, just noting that when we talk about OSCAR, we don't have to be looking at it from a single facility perspective or a single unit perspective. We have been working with a number of folks in the community to look at more theater level solutions. So essentially you have your single command and control that is connected to multiple sensor groups which are deployed in different areas. You can have different missions, different network plans, different spectrum allocations that all exist in different areas, and your OSCAR functionality will still work. We're improving our role-based access control so that users in individual facilities might only be able to see what they're responsible for, what they have purview for, but people more in the area level or the theater level could look at data from multiple sites, bring it all together into a single pane of glass, single dashboard to get a better understanding of what's happening in their area of responsibility. A couple of things that we're looking at for this, again, a little bit more on the tactical side, would be use cases like Blue Force signature monitoring, so understanding what we look like when we're out there in theater, understanding from an emissions control perspective if the MCON policies are being followed, how do you set appropriate MCON policies, is anyone violating the current MCON policy, and that could be from a restricted versus permissive basis. It could be, hey, no one should emit in this area above 1 watt, something like that. So we're currently working to refine some of the workflows for how that information is being put in there, but we have done a number of field tests where we've shown the ability to detect not just authorized versus unauthorized, but yes, you are authorized to emit, just not right now. Right now, we're under an MCON policy. So we're trying to put tools in there to have automated alerts pop up that could then go up to the spectrum manager, go up to the commander, and let them know that there's something that needs to be acted on. And then that could be tied into other tools that we have on the real-time side, like being able to geolocate where those signals are coming from, to say, hey, yes, there's a problem. Yes, it's us and not from somebody else. And oh, it's roughly over here. So then you could just make a call and get that taken care of more quickly than if you didn't have a tool like this in place. So just a couple of functions, and I think I've touched on several of these in the previous descriptions, but on the spectrum management planning side, we're trying to streamline the request and assignment workflow, again, starting with data ingest from standard tools and databases, trying to work towards more of a machine-to-machine interface in the future. We're not looking to replace any existing tools. We're looking to augment those and make people's lives easier. So anytime that there is a spectrum manager that comes and says, hey, this would be a burden for me to use, that's the exact kind of feedback that we want, because it lets us know that we need to redesign that process, or maybe that's just not a functionality that we need to tackle within this particular tool. Interference analysis engine is something which uses RF propagation modeling to understand where there's the expectation that there might be interference. Where we do have information on the equipment characteristics, we'll factor that into the calculations which we do, so that we can raise the flag and say, yeah, this allocation here to here is not expected to interfere. You've got enough separation. Maybe you've got a mountain in between. Who knows? But this to here is expected to interfere. That's not something which can be done concurrently. You're going to need to move to a different frequency, and providing quantitative metrics behind that to allow the spectrum manager to make good allocations. And then we also have the ability within OSCAR to do automated frequency assignments. So you put in all your planning data, you put in your constraints, and you click the auto recommend button, and it will go network by network and say, okay, based upon the request criteria, here's the frequency that we recommend that you assign. Again, it's not an automated assignment, it's more of an automated recommendation, which then the spectrum manager can act on and say, yes, I approve, or no, I don't. And most of the automated workflows that we have right now, again, more intended for range applications where the local spectrum manager has a frequency pool, which they have local purview over. So we're looking to expand some of those workflows to other use cases as well. On the real-time side, continuous spectrum monitoring, being able to automate how your sensors are scanning the spectrum. We've got, for example, a single button right now you can click where it looks at all the planning information for the day and comes up with a scan profile, and then you can just click the deploy button and it pushes that out to all the sensors in the sensor group that you've got selected. So we're trying to make this process easy so you don't have to have somebody that's looking at all these things that are going on and saying, okay, well, where should we monitor spectrum for the day? While still supporting the more manual approach for expert users that want to have that capability. And then bringing all that data back in, automatic updating of your Spectrum SA data on what we hope is a pretty intuitive display, heat maps, line charts, waterfalls, the usual things, as well as geolocation results with uncertainty heat maps and other visualizations of what's going on in the spectrum. The auditing and alert side, we've got a view which is, green is good, red is bad kind of view, which shows where there's unauthorized usage of the spectrum, where there is authorized usage of the spectrum, where you have assignments where you verify that yes, people are actually using that, where you've got assignments that people have not actually used that assignment. Trying to make it all, again, color-coded and intuitive to look at, where you can hover over the boxes and then get more information as necessary, right-click, and then use that to trigger different actions like, oh, I have an unauthorized assignment, well, let me go geolocate that. Let me go get some more information on that. Again, trying to make these things easier to accomplish and more intuitive to use for current users. And then the real-time deconfliction side, if we do see that there's a problem, being able to have Oscar make that recommendation of, we think you'd be able to deconflict that by going to this channel over here, by moving this network from here to here, or maybe by moving somebody physically in space. Right now, we're really only looking at it from a time frequency perspective, but we want to start bringing in geospatial characteristics as well. All right. So as mentioned, the Oscar program itself was a 3-year effort coming to its close right now. We did, I think, something on the order of 10 different field tests with Oscar over the last couple of years. So this isn't just a on paper or in modeling and simulation space kind of technology. This is something we brought out in the field for range use cases, for tactical use cases. We've looked at more terrestrial, we've looked at maritime. So I won't read through all of these step by step. This is just a couple that got called out over here. Vanguard, CyberQuest, NetModX, Silent Swarm I'll touch on a little bit more. Because it was multi-domain. We had sensors that were on uncrewed surface vessels. We had sensors which were on crewed vessels in the Alpena area by Thunder Bay. We also had some sensors which were forward deployed on tripods on little islands in the bay. We had a sensor that was on a drone that was able to fly around to get some additional information. All the data backhauled using mesh radio networks. I think it was Silvus in 2024. We had a sensor that was connected via Starlink. We had others that were just making use of commercial cellular when it was available, and then put all of that together into one picture. The Oscar GUI for that was made accessible to the government assessors, was made accessible to the other team members that we had. Oscar was credited with identifying where the other side's high-valued unit was when we had more of a contested vignette later on in the test event. So it was pretty successful. I think it demonstrated a lot of the capabilities for the system. The other thing that we helped our teammates on when they were seeing issues with adversarial emissions in the environment was doing an assessment for where there were clear channels based upon planning plus sense spectrum information. So we can get some more information to you on that. I believe the government itself put out a report on Silent Swarm from NSWC Crane, if there's additional questions there. Just a little bit on Vanguard 2024, which was kind of the capstone field test for Oscar last year. So there's additional information on the specifics that I can't get into in this room, but please come find me if you'd like to know a little bit more on this. So a couple of achievements here. Deployment of the heterogeneous sensor network. We covered a very wide area out at Fort Huachuca. There were a lot of participants present, and we were seen as like a white cell asset for that event, somebody who could provide ground truth and could help make sure that the exercise was proceeding smoothly. We supported the resolution of a couple of interference events. During the exercise, we were able to help individual test participants that were looking for particular pieces of data coming out in terms of that data capture. we were able to capture sequences of signals to understand whether or not they were representative of different platforms that people were interested in. And in general, it was seen as quite a positive event. Oscar was deployed at Fort Huachuca as a permanent asset just this month, actually. So it's something which is in active use right now. And we're very proud that people are finding value out of it. So still a ways to go. The follow-on program is looking to take Oscar as a starting point, transform that into, again, what's called the Spectrum Integration System, mature its capabilities, and get it out to additional locations. So it is an active, ongoing development effort right now, and we'd love everyone's inputs on that. So one other thing I wanted to touch on, just because spectrum sharing is such a big deal these days, is how can we use something like Oscar, not just for dynamic spectrum access, but also to support dynamic spectrum sharing? So here's a use case we brought up that may or may not be pertinent these days, where Navy ships coming into port, there's other users of the spectrum that are in the area that could be commercial, they could be non-commercial, they could be US, they could be others. In this particular use case, it's envisioned that, again, there's a spectrum sharing coordination system or coordination portal in which there are spectrum sharing agreements that have been documented over there. So it's another source of data that Oscar can bring in and then understand how to set sensors that are present on land, sensors that might be on each of the individual vessels into one picture, and then make sure that those spectrum sharing agreements are being followed, identify where they're not being followed, and come up with recommendations for how to adjust in real time if there's an issue or if somebody's not following the rules. We have a number of other technologies we're working at labs to help with the DSS problem, specifically at radar and commercial 5G coexistence, how we can tie into hooks to control 5G base stations and help with that kind of problem. A little bit outside of the box for the Oscar presentation, but if anyone's interested in some more details on that, please come find me afterwards in the break. So I think that's the last content slide I have. Again, here's my contact information over here. Again, please feel free to reach out. And do we have time for questions? No. Do not have time for questions. So come find me at the break, and thank you, everyone.
Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Hey, team, my apologies if that was a little obvious, but we're trying to really get ourselves back in a little bit of a time. So Mr. Andrew will be here all day. I just committed him to be here all day. I will say that all those in uniform will have a question or a comment to you, especially those Marines. We saw a lot of Army cooperation, collaboration. I have more than confidence that the Marines would have liked to get their hands on and try to provide some user experience of what that end user would like to see. They got a lot to say, and they're not shy to say it. I know a couple of them. So, hey, team.
If anybody wants to get their hands on it, at least dots, hit me up and I can send you the package and get you started.
And that's great, because the one question that it was mentioned online is that they would like the government POC so we can go ahead and actually tap into the right source. So information forthcoming on the chat room. So hey team, right now here in Sunnyside, California is 0950. We're gonna be back seated at 10:15 so we can get back somewhat on track. So 10:15, we're gonna bring it sharply. Thank you.